Welcome to Seltzer Squad, the podcast about staying sober in the city, with your hosts, Kate Sander and Jes Valentine.
Did y'all know that you can get extra Seltzer Squad content at patreon.com/Seltzer Squad?
Yeah, Kate, they can get early access to our episodes. They can get videos of us and even bonus episodes every month.
That no one else gets.
No one else gets it, only our patrons. So this is truly a labor of love for us. So if you could help support us, we'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, we love you, Squad.
We love you, Squad.
Sign up at patreon.com/Seltzer Squad. Jess, are you listening to any good books?
Right now, I'm actually listening to an Audible exclusive podcast.
Ooh, I'm listening to Blackout by Sarah Hepola.
Oh, I listened to that one back in the day.
I mean, I'm a huge proponent of Audible. I love listening to Quit Lit or really any book. But did you know, Squad, that you can use our discount code to get a free month of Audible? Meaning you get a free book if you sign up.
That's right. Just go to audibletrial.com/Seltzer Squad and get a free month on us. I actually just signed up myself using it.
Hey, Kate.
Hi, Jessica.
What you eating?
Having a little granola bar. Little break here.
Nice. I'm having a venti iced white mocha, and usually these last me 2 days. But since we are recording,
We're on a roll.
It's bad. We are on a roll. I'm so proud of us.
Okay. Today I want to talk about your sober identity. Like somebody gave us we asked the squad for episode ideas, and somebody talked about the separation of their sober identity with the rest of their identity. So identity meaning sister, mother, whatever the fuck you want to identify as. But sobriety is definitely part of my identity. And I think, you know, you and I have talked at length about like if it's in the front seat, if it's the star of the show, like at what point. I think in early sobriety, often you see people get really into it. Like there'll be like a rocky entry and then they'll be really into it. And then like at some point they'll be like, I want to write a book. I want to start a blog. And I think that's very natural. Obviously we have a podcast, so I can relate. Sure. But we've been doing this for a long time now. And I think there's been an evolution of how we feel about being our sober identity, I guess, has evolved. So what do you think about that? Like just initially?
I think that a lot of people, they lead with that. And I want to say, I'm a sober person. It's part of my identity, but that doesn't define me. And I think that there are people, and it's just like, it defines them. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's what they want, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't go around saying, I don't put like sober in my like Instagram bio. Sure. Or, you know, I don't lead with it.
Right.
I'm not ashamed of it by any means. I'm 100% open. It's just not the first thing on how I define myself. Well, it is for other people.
Yeah. I think that's also a symptom of like early recovery is that you're so excited about it. And like you've said before, like evangelical, like you're like, this is so amazing. I want everyone to do it. I want everyone to feel how great this is. And
100%.
For me, I was like hesitant about really claiming that part of my identity. I was kind of kept that part hidden from most of the world. And I think the coming out of it all as a sober podcaster and a lady who no longer drinks has been really powerful for me, but it's also evolved. Like I think we were really into it in the beginning. And then I think there was a point where we were also like, do we want to quit this? And you know, I think that we've come around, or at least we've come around to where it's more balanced and not overtaking our lives, but still a part of our lives, which for me feels more manageable.
Yeah. I mean, I think about quitting all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie, because when you do have, so I guess the best way to put it is I don't like to have to think about being a sober person. Right. And when we do like the podcast, it's like I have to think about it. And not just that, but there's just little things in my life that I'm like, taking note of, because it could be like something, an interesting topic or
Sure.
something for us to discuss. When if I didn't have the podcast, obviously I wouldn't be thinking like that. With that said, I feel like some people want to live, breathe, sleep being sober, that's just not me. However, it probably was like when I first, like the first year or whatever, because like you said, you're under this pink cloud. You're so excited. Your life is like turning around. You're starting to see like the benefits of being sober. But yeah, I feel like it's part of me. It's not the whole of me. And I've got so many other things. It's just one interesting thing about me that makes me, while I don't want to just be solely known as like the sober girl.
Do you think it was that in the beginning?
It's not that I wanted to be, but I was just definitely more of like a cheerleader, like, yeah, sober this, sober that, sober this. Like, I only would listen to sober podcasts and read sober books and all that kind of shit. But now it's just slowly become part of my life rather than taking up the majority of my life. Does that make sense? Kind of.
Yeah, there was definitely a part of me that always listened to sober, podcasts and books and absorbed the sober quit lit because I needed it. And I was at that point in that space, and those things I use as major resources. And then we started the podcast, and I still needed that. And then I think there was a switch where it felt more like work. Like listening to a sober podcast felt like an obligation because I felt like I needed to be in the know, and not that I was necessarily getting anything personally that I needed. So I think I started seeking it out for the wrong reasons. And then now it's changed for me in the regards of like, I get a lot out of connecting with you and knowing that other people benefit from that too. Like, this is a big part of my recovery, but it doesn't take up as much space, like you said, that it used to. Like we never look forward to recording, but we always are glad we did it. And I enjoy the time that I spend with you and the topics that we discuss, but sometimes it feels like a to do to get there. And I think that that might be feels normal for recoveries. It's not always like exciting, but it's beneficial to both of us. And then obviously we enjoy that it's helping other people.
I think like in the beginning, especially when we started the podcast, I felt like I had to read every quit lit book, listen to I needed to know every sober
person,
celebrity. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Cause I felt like I wasn't a good enough sober person if I didn't. And I don't feel like that anymore.
Yes.
Even like with guests, right? Like in the beginning when you have guests, like I would be like, I have to make sure that I read their book or watch the things that they were on or this. And it's like, no, like you don't have to, like you can. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't, sometimes I'll like partially, but there's no such thing as being like a good sober person, a bad sober person, except for like drinking. Like,
just not drinking.
You're a bad sober person if you're drinking.
Right. I've even noticed like in our peer group, like people, like other sober people that we've gotten close to have gone through evolutions. Like even when we interviewed like Omar, for example, he's like, I'm kind of like detaching away from I still do addiction, but I'm like kind of moving away from that. And I feel like it's because you're allowed to grow in that space as well. Like obviously we bring other topics to the podcast, but we try to look through the lens of sobriety and how that affects it. But, I think even a girlfriend of mine reached out to me and she's like, I thought I wanted to like post on Instagram all day about being sober and do the inspiration thing. And she's like, but I don't really feel like connected to that space. Like I'm kind of over that hump in sobriety. And I think that's very common of like, it's all of your time because you're new, you're finding new routines, you're getting inspired. Everything feels exciting and new. But then like we've said before, like it almost keeps you in early sobriety that like you're not allowed to evolve past that. And that can be hard to kind of like shed that sober identity. Is it's not like I have recovery under control, but like I'm in a good place with my recovery. So it doesn't take up as much space in my life because I have implemented the tools and, did that initial deep dive into all of those resources to make myself feel better. And now I do feel better. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with people that like that's all that they care about is sobriety. Sometimes some people need that for their own accountability. I know that I needed the podcast in the beginning for my own accountability, but shit, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, even like when choosing guests, right? In the beginning, we wanted people that like wrote a sober book, had a sober podcast, et cetera, et cetera. And now it's like, let's just get this person who happens to be sober.
Yeah.
Like the conversation doesn't always have to be about sobriety. Obviously, because we have a sober podcast, we ask them questions about that. But I just like,
I think it became more interesting to us that sobriety was just an element of other people, because majority of our listeners and you and I lead regular lives. Like this isn't our job. This is like a hobby that we do on the side that is beneficial to our mental health. But we got interested in, I want to hear from the person that like has a regular job and also happens to be sober. I want to hear from the person that is, you know, a small business owner, but it's not related to just sobriety. And you know,
that's what mostly it is.
Well, that's what we see, obviously, because we're on our like social media. So we see everybody else and we're like, oh, we need to have this person and we need to have that person. And all of that is great. And obviously we want that, but that's not everything.
Most people are just normal people.
Right.
Is what I'm saying. Like it's just like the majority of sober people are just normal people. They're not
sober as their job.
Celebrities.
Yes. Jess, what's our number one piece of advice when people are getting sober?
Therapy.
So much therapy that I'm going to school to be a giver of therapy.
This is true.
BetterHelp reached out to partner with us at the Seltzer Squad to offer 10% off a monthly membership to BetterHelp.com.
What is BetterHelp.com?
BetterHelp is an online therapy platform that is for individuals, for couples. You take a short quiz, you get matched up with a mental health professional, and you, through the app, are able to video, or you can just message back and forth with a licensed professional to give you counseling and guidance on anything and everything that you're going through.
So how do our listeners use our code?
You just go to betterhelp.com/Seltzer Squad and you'll receive 10% off your first month. Jess, what's another way listeners can support the pod?
You know, the best way that someone can support our podcast, besides from joining our Patreon, is to also treat themselves to sober treats, because we have a whole merch store.
From Princess FOMO to Former Hot Mess, we've got you guys covered. Check out seltzersquadshop.com to treat yourself to something sober
while supporting the pod.
So
I think that's an important distinction, but not to discourage somebody from wanting to start something if they're feeling really enthusiastic about it. I would say, looking through the lens of the last few years, it's also okay to know when to quit. Like, I've thought many times about, like, is this podcast just perpetual, or will there one day be an end? Like, there will one day be an end, and that doesn't mean things went south or things went sour or whatever. It's like, naturally, like, things aren't fine infinite, you know? So it's okay if you want to start a sober. Yeah, it's okay if you want to start a sober podcast, and then in a year later you don't want to have it anymore. I think, you know, Holly and Laura were a good example of, they called it quits at a certain point and they're both fine. I mean, granted, their careers are both defined by sobriety, but I think there's also, like, I think it's okay that, you know, if you want to write the book because it would be cathartic for you to do it and it'll help other people, obviously definitely do it. But once it starts to feel like an obligation is when, like, I think it's time to revisit the why. And some aspects of this felt like an obligation to me for a while. And I think we both sort of like had to let certain areas of expectations go, and then it became more enjoyable for both of us. It's like, you know, we felt like because we had a sober podcast, we also have to have a sober TikTok, and we have to have a sober Instagram, and we have to have, like, and it just became more and more and more things that were taking away from fulfilling us in other areas because we felt like we had to do it. And I would say that's a negative, where it's like, at the end of the day, you and I just like recording the podcast and putting it out and connecting with each other when we have free time. And when it starts to feel like work, it became less fun. And then it's like, you know, this doesn't define me. It's like, this isn't all of my life anymore. This is obviously being sober is in my mind every single day, but managing my sobriety, and it's not my job to not my job yet to like help those people in that way. And I can't, I have to preserve some space for myself.
For yourself. Exactly. And there was a small point in time, very small point in time though, that it felt like we were doing it for this, like everyone else, except for us.
Yes.
And that's when I think I really wasn't enjoying it.
Yes.
It's just like, oh, okay, just because people expect it, so we have to do it because they want it. But the truth of the matter is it's ultimately our decision. We both are people pleasers, so we kept at it. And I'm glad that we did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess just as far as like leading with being a sober person, I feel like that's probably more of an early sobriety thing.
It was for me.
What do you think?
Yeah. I think once I was comfortable being okay telling people that, and I felt more confident, then it became more of an identity. But on the reverse end, it was really hard for me to let go of the other identities of like not being a drinking person anymore. So picking up the sober identity felt shameful to me for a long time. So once we started the podcast and I was able to celebrate it, that was really important for me. And now it's like, I'm okay with it, but I don't need to talk about it all the time.
Yeah. It's exhausting.
Yes. And I think also like at the time we started, there wasn't a ton of online things like there are now. And now it feels like we're screaming into a vacuum where it's like, I don't even think we have, sometimes it's like, we don't have anything extra to say. It's just Jess and I having a conversation, and that's the way that we choose to keep it. There's a million things that we could do, but that also leverages self-care time for the two of us, that it becomes unhealthy from a mental health, like illness aspect, because we're people pleasers and perfectionists.
Yeah, it's hard. It's just like, so it's actually funny because now that I don't drink, this doesn't happen. But as a tattooer, it's like, that is another thing that like, I'm covered in tattoos. It's a big part of my identity. But when I be going out to the bars, it's just like, so when I'm at work, I love talking about tattoos. I'll answer the same 5 questions a day, like a million times a day. I mean, but then I'd go out to a bar, and then people like either see that I have a lot of tattoos and want to talk to me about tattoos, or know that I'm a tattoo artist and want to have me give them like basically consultations and stuff. And it's like, this isn't like enjoyable. Like, I don't want to talk about this.
Yeah. You want to put that identity down for the day.
Exactly. And it's like the same thing with sobriety, right? And other same thing, I'm sure, with like other occupations or stuff out there. It's just like with anything. Sometimes you want to be able to just like turn that part of you off and have some self-care, and that should be respected.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like people don't really pressure me to talk about my sobriety. But I think it's also still like a very taboo subject, which is funny.
Like
because
outside
it's like,
of this circle for sure.
Yes, of course. And it's like, I have no problem talking about like sobriety at all.
Do you think
like,
that's
I'm
because of the podcast though?
That's a good question.
Because we've been talking to ourselves for 3 years.
I think you're right, because I feel like the podcast has definitely helped put down all the shame around being sober, which if we didn't have the podcast, I bet I would still feel like really shameful, because the podcast is what has made me the sober person that I am today, which is proud and very like open and honest, and I don't give a fuck. So I don't know. I think you're right. I think that I maybe wouldn't want to be as forthcoming with people, but because the podcast has kind of trained me, I don't know.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that as a person that struggles with addiction, I run into things full force. So it is natural that like if I get sober, I want to do sobriety 110%. I want to get an A+. And then if I go on a diet, I want to get an A+ with my, so I can identify with people wanting to run full force into like, I want to start a blog, I want to start Instagram, I want to do all the things. Like that's amazing. But also I would just caution them to think the plan through, because if you lose enthusiasm, you have to figure out what it is that you love about what you're doing. Because it's like, I love genuinely talking to you about life and about these things. I don't always love talking about sobriety, but I know that I love sitting down and talking about hard stuff. And I think that's what a lot of sobriety is. So that part of me gets fulfilled by doing it. Is it like me poring over what we should talk about all the time like it used to be? I think we were both much more, engaged to do the best. And now it's just like once we took the pressure off of like goals, then we started enjoying ourselves more.
Yeah, I think that we put all these pressures on ourselves. And I don't think we do that anymore. We're like, okay, this is like a thing that we do. And this is how we do it. We found like our groove. And in the beginning, I really, like you said, I want us to have like the best podcast. And I wanted like people to like look up to us or whatever, relate to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's like, okay, like cool.
Yeah.
Like the importance isn't that anymore.
I think that's important to note, though, because that part of your identity, wanting to be recognized, was also attached to sobriety. And I think the long term of the sober identity thing is like, you don't get recognition. It's a very reflective, congratulations. It's like no one pats us on the back for being sober. Yes, we celebrate in our circles, but like every day I'm sober, no one rings my doorbell and gives me $100, So I think that's the other thing, is that it, just like anything else, it has to be part of you, but it can't be all of you, just like drinking.
Yes.
Drinking can't be any of me, but for living life in moderation, like it can be part of you, but not all of you.
So good. Yeah.
But
I want to know everyone's opinions on it. Like, do you lead with your sobriety? And if you do, like, by all means, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know. Let us know.
Do you lead with it anymore?
Nah, I don't think so. But I also don't know, because I don't live. I don't see people. I don't know. I don't do things. You know what I mean? Ask me again in a year or something. But I don't do things like I used to. The world shut down.
We're not really around other people anymore.
Yeah. I know it's open back up, but I'm still not really there yet. I'm taking it really slow, integrating myself back into the real world. So I don't know, man. Anyway.
Interesting. Yeah. But I don't want this to deter anybody from starting a sober project. Obviously, by all means,
I think the more that there are, the better, because people need resources. That's the number one thing. And the more resources, the better, because not everyone's going to resonate with each one.
Yes.
So everyone needs to find their own sober thing, and some people will like our podcast, some people will hate our podcast, some people will love this one blog and hate another. So I think the more that's out there, the better, and you're going to find your people. So definitely keep at it, and
until we meet again.
Be nice to yourself.
Don't forget, hangovers suck.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Every review helps other listeners find us. Music by Dead Go West. Art by Kate Sander. For show notes and resources, check out seltzersquad.com.